Well, the hits just keep on coming. The Walt Disney Company is being sued again by somebody else, this time in the form of TSG for what it alleges are breach of contract issues following Disney's acquisition of 20th Century Fox back in 2019. And to help us walk through the particulars of this case, today we are joined by our friend Andrew from The Legal Mindset. Here we go. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. Joined today by my friend Andrew Esquire of The Legal Mindset. Welcome aboard, sir.
Pleasure to be back with you, Valiant Renegade, and pleasure to have another Disney lawsuit to talk about. Just when you think that we're all done, just when we think we're lawsuited out, no, yet another one falls into our laps.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's just been a string of events, and people ask, you cover Disney a lot. I'm like, well, they keep making all the big news. This is the studio that keeps screwing everything up. I mean, They had a golden kingdom in Orlando, Florida that they blew to pieces by their own hand. They've had so many problems in the theater, on streaming. They've gotten themselves into too many messes. We've covered all of them, but this is the latest one here that we're going to talk about. And this from Wall Street Journal, movie financier TSG accuses Disney of depriving it of millions of dollars. And as a quick aside on this, when I first saw this, Andrew, it kind of harkened back to some stories we've seen before with other film studios. There are similar allegations here. It sniffs exactly of what we saw with Warner Brothers under the old regime before David Zaslav, when guys like Jason Kilar were running things over there and did Project Popcorn, put the entire 2021 slate of Warner Brothers films day and date on streaming on HBO Max in tandem with theaters. And it basically screwed a lot of participations and residuals for producers, writers, headline talent. Two films in particular were big problems for Warner Brothers that year. It cost them hundreds of millions of dollars alone to Legendary Pictures, which made for Warner Brothers things like Godzilla vs. Kong, and later in that year, Dune. And that was a big problem. And in addition to that, Warner Brothers had to pay out, I think, another couple of $100 million to the talent agency that represented a lot of the talent in these pictures that got shanked from the theaters. Now it looks like here we got TSG that had a deal with Fox, who, of course, was acquired by Disney back in 2019 for $70+ billion. We've covered the fact that Disney has been throwing a lot of Fox content since then under the bus. Even though they release it in theaters, they've basically given it no marketing support, or they've shanked pictures altogether, dumped them onto Hulu, FX, Disney Plus, whatever the case may be. Kind of walk us through this. What have you seen so far? You've done some great videos on this. Tell the folks out there what your initial thoughts are.
Yeah, I did a deep dive on this where I went through the entire complaint and went through the exact language, read it through cover to cover in the entire complaint. So obviously I have that on my channel. But to give a summary here, this is a very serious allegation with TSG. And with all due respect to your analysis and comparison, I think this is far beyond what was previously at stake in these other cases. Not only because it involves, not only because it involves Disney, but because it involves several areas of malfeasance. So not just a poor audit, or rather in terms of, as they call it in the lawsuit, Hollywood accounting, which is, I love this term now, Hollywood accounting. They stated, and I'll quote here from the actual lawsuit, Hollywood accounting refers to the opaque and creative methods frequently employed by major television and film studios to cheat those who share in the profits of a television series or films. But this case stands out even by those standards. So this is the cheat of a cheat of a cheat. So not only, let me give you three levels here. Not only did they not properly report revenues. But when it was acquired by Disney and specific, right? So in the beginning, we try to absolve it because this is Fox. Actually, the worst conduct here happened by Disney because once they acquired Fox, things dramatically became worse. They tried to get out of those contracts regarding streaming. They wanted to rush things onto streaming. They actually breached their agreements with HBO, which gave out guaranteed revenue to pay out to Fox. They literally harmed their left arm to aid their right arm. To aid Disney Plus streaming, they cut off those license revenues with HBO, and because of that, they lost revenue for TSG. And on top of that, when TSG said, hey, we have the right to reevaluate the amount we want to invest in certain tranches and certain films. And when they went to exercise that option, which is a contractual option for them, Disney, which controlled Fox at the time, said no. In fact, they said, in fact, you can't pull out, you can't withdraw your funding. And if you can't provide it, you have to take a loan from us and you have to pay us back at a very, very high interest rate, let's say. And they lost out on a very large amount of the profits, right? Because that was kind of the payback.
That sounds very Disney. Yeah.
Very Disney. They tried to nickel and dime them and get them for everything they got. So they're coming after them for tortious interference with contract here, in addition to other claims. And the important thing here is, and you can see this in the prayer for relief, is they do not give a monetary number that they are suing for. They have this is for damages to be proven at trial. So we haven't even seen a cap on this. And mind you, this includes pictures which they list off in the lawsuit, such as Avatar, The Way of Water, Bohemian Rhapsody,
That's a big one.
Deadpool 2, X-Men, Logan, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, The Martian, The Grand Budapest Hotel, Jojo Rabbit, Banshees of Inisherin, Hidden Figures, Shape of Water, Empire Light, all big properties, many of which are very successful, right?
Yeah, and let's real quick remind folks, at TSG, for those of you who don't know, this is basically, think of it like as a private equity firm, and they're in the business of investing and financing in major Hollywood productions. That's what they do. They've done it for a very long time. And just to grab a few snippets from the article, but you can see here, TSG said that it spent over $3.3 billion over the past decade co-funding more than 140 movies, including some of the ones you just mentioned. And as they say here in the lawsuit, TSG actually alleges that Disney and the studio, quote, have tried to use nearly every trick in the Hollywood accounting book, as you mentioned, to deprive it of, quote, hundreds of millions of dollars. So they're giving you some guidance towards what they're going to be looking for in this lawsuit. And of course, representatives for the Walt Disney Company denied a request for comment for the article.
They haven't even responded to the complaint yet. They barely had time to read this. This is fresh off the presses, so of course they can't respond to it yet publicly.
Yeah, I mean, TSG is saying that they recently requested an audit after noticing a decline in profits. After examining the books for 3 undisclosed films, TSG is alleging that it found, quote, rampant self-dealing, no surprise, and, quote, accounting tricks that showed it had been underpaid by $40 million. Now, specificity on this one, Andrew, things like rampant self-dealing. I think we've seen another accusation on the Walt Disney Company recently on rampant self-dealing that came from the new Central Florida Tourism Oversight District.
Correct.
Where Disney was basically abusing its authority, its complete god powers over the former Reedy Creek Improvement District, where they would have Reedy Creek effectively hiring contractors that Disney basically sent to them and said, you should use this one. Even though it might be 10, 15, 20% more expensive than the other guys out there.
You should use them.
You should use these guys because they meet the DEI metrics that we require.
And this one is even worse because what they were doing here is Disney was writing off a lot of these expenses to its own subsidiaries, to its own spun-off entities. So they're saying, oh, well, you know, these other entities, which are their distributors, right? Because distribution fees were written off and distribution expenses were not included in what had to be paid out. They said, oh, we have to pay all these expenses to our subsidiary. So that was a trick that Disney was pulling, which once again, when you do it knowingly, that is called intentional interference with contractual relations, which is exactly what they're being sued for, in addition to breach of contract, breach of implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing, and inducing breach of contract. So there's 4 total claims against them, which is what makes it more serious than just if there's 1 or 2 claims. This is a multi-pronged attack, which is why Disney has to deal with this in a decisive way.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find interesting about this, because I always talk about things like windowing, right? Why are Hollywood studios struggling so badly these days? It's because they have, by and large, for the last several years, almost entirely, if not entirely, abandoned the traditional windowing system of releasing a movie into theaters, having it there for 60 to 90 days, having maybe a 30-day breather before it makes it on its way to, what used to be you'd go to Blockbuster Video, your local video store, and rent the copy of the movie. And then a few weeks later, or a month later, you could buy a physical copy for yourself. Now, of course, in recent years, that's been PVOD or PVOD, where you could rent or buy through things like Apple TV or Amazon Prime or something like this, and then you'd be able to get physical media shortly after. But they've collapsed all this into this, hey, after 45 days, it'll be on Disney+. And that has cut a lot of things out. This next section to me is what's interesting under that, is because what it says, TSG alleges that a recent renegotiation of the Fox Movie Studios deal with Warner Brothers Discovery's HBO channel and Max streaming service had a similar effect on its potential profits. Under the term of the original agreement, HBO paid a premium for an exclusive window to carry movies on its service. And this deal is what Fox had with HBO for years. And so people understand, because unlike Disney, Fox never had its own proprietary streaming service. Just like Sony has chosen not to have a proprietary service, which is why Netflix sends them billions of dollars for that contract to get all of that Sony content, even things like Spider-Man, right? That all goes to Netflix. Everything goes to Netflix from Sony. Universal even has a deal with Netflix and Amazon for part of the pay one window. What happened here was Disney decided with Avatar, because people asked me for weeks, why is Avatar on HBO and Disney+? Here's why, because Disney stepped in and basically said, nah. And that was one of the films that TSG was involved in as an investor, because TSG got involved with James Cameron's Lightstorm Entertainment to help fund the movie and Fox and whatnot when that was going on. And Disney stepped in and said, well, we want to put it on Disney+. So we're going to force a renegotiation. HBO is no longer going to have exclusivity for things like Avatar: The Way of Water. And then HBO was like, well, we can't give you the full amount because Disney just stuck the knife in our third rib.
Well, they violated their agreement, right? Because, I mean, they obviously, if they had an agreement to window it and to preview it during a certain period of time or release it during a certain period of time, and they're not doing that, then, yeah, that's a violation of contract, right? It's a violation of a previous contract between Fox and HBO, which Disney doesn't care about. And actually, I shared something real quick, if you don't mind sharing it. This is from the actual complaint. And this is why listening in to your earnings calls is so important, because they actually use a quote from the August 9th earnings call
from last
to put
Wednesday.
The nail in the coffin. Yes, which we watched together live on your channel. So let me read this little section. This is from 17. These deviations from the traditional window in Fox films, in spite of Fox's express and implied obligations, were a direct result of Disney's interference in the agreement in pursuit of its ultimate goal, to prop up its wholly or majority-owned streaming platforms and the share price of its stock using content from other divisions of the company. Bob Iger admitted during the August 9th earnings call, where he announced the subscription price increase, the second subscription price increase in a year, he admitted with respect to Disney Plus, we grew this business really fast, really before we even knew what our pricing strategy should or could be.
Boom.
Stuck the foot in his mouth there and just absolutely got wrecked for it.
Yeah.
And this is why you pay attention to this stuff. This is why we pay attention to stuff, because it all adds up. And if you're not careful, you're going to end up digging yourself in. We saw how he dug himself in with bad statements regarding the Florida case, and now he's digging himself in regarding TSG. It just all comes around in a beautiful way.
Yeah, and I mean that's that same comment about we didn't understand streaming pricing strategy. I think you could some could argue that was the problem for a lot of the streamers out there, and Disney has been consistently raising prices, which everybody seemed to expect from day one. And of course, this also ties into that. That same quote, I guarantee you, Andrew, is probably going to get brought up in the issue with the writers and actors guilds, complaining about how we're not getting residuals anymore. Same as TSG. Yes. Now, I mean, the actors and writers is a completely different situation from what they're complaining about versus this. What we're talking about here was contractually guaranteed. You're obligated to pay us a portion of this. We have this in writing. You were supposed to do this. You violated the contract. In this case, again, using Avatar as an example for everybody to kind of get a grip on, this did not go exclusively to HBO Max as it was originally contracted to do, because Disney decided after buying Fox they didn't want to do that anymore. Didn't matter. And Andrew, would you explain to the audience that, what happens when a company like Disney buys a company like Fox, and those smart lawyers over there at Fox at every studio write contracts to address things called, this contract will survive all successors and assigns.
Right.
So could you explain, does Disney have the right to just go, nah, I don't want to do this anymore?
No, they do not. The contracts, when you acquire a company, when you go through a merger and acquisition, you go through a long period of due diligence, which is looking through all the contracts that and agreements and existing arrangements that company you're acquiring has, which is why, by the way, I've been a corporate attorney. I've done M&A. I've been part of a merger and acquisition. These things can take a year because you're just going through old contracts and looking through them, and you are bound by them. And if you intentionally try to undermine them, that is called tortious interference with contract. You have an existing contract and you're trying to undermine it. Now, Disney was allowed, and in fact, there were 9 amendments to this agreement. This agreement was signed in 2012, and there are many amendments. But an amendment requires agreement of both parties. But Disney, as in most cases, doesn't care what the other party thinks. They don't want to negotiate. They want it Disney's way. They want to do it their way without any pushback. We've seen this parallel in Florida. Now, in this agreement, we see, okay, they wanted their money. They wanted to get their cut, but they didn't want to pay. So they figured out a way to do that with this Hollywood accounting, as they say.
Yeah, the Hollywood accounting. And just, as I mentioned before, we're talking about this with actually a little bit with Ron Coleman earlier tonight with another video that's going to be coming out soon.
And this has been, by the way, this has been known for years, right? This is not something that's been new, kind of in terms of the dealing with subsidiaries and some of the accounting there. We all know about that. We all know how that's going for a while. But this is a beyond the pale. This is, you have a knowing agreement with a financier, and you go out of your way to just double up on bad behavior. So much so that because of all their malfeasance, they actually didn't have the money they wanted to invest in Avatar. Because remember, the amount of money the financiers get is based on how much they invest. They didn't have enough money to invest, so they had to borrow, which meant that Disney got to keep 50% of their overall profits of whatever they took out. So because of that, they got absolutely destroyed, which is why their liability, because of this bad faith conduct, is in the hundreds of millions. So we could be talking about $500 million here, potentially 200 million, 300 million, 400 million. Those are all possible numbers.
Oh, yeah. I think it's going to be in the hundreds. I think it's easily going to be in the hundreds, because I even read something that they were talking about in the suit with TSG versus Disney here, saying that Disney was even trying to deduct things like distribution fees and all this. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. TSG, to my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, Andrew, but TSG, to my understanding, was a co-financier, private equity financier of the production. They had nothing to do with distribution. And I mean, in the typical traditional Hollywood model, production and distribution are separate. Now, sometimes, if you're Disney and you've got 6 studios and you're producing and distributing your own content, okay, that's different. But in this case, this was not. Avatar is not a Disney production. This is something made by Cameron and his core.
So to be very clear here, the qualified gross receipts, which is the money that they could get from the films, right? That was supposed to be the money that their percentage they invested in, the amount they take, less contractually agreed upon distribution fees and expenses. So there were very specific distribution fees and expenses that they said, okay, we agree you can net those out. Sort of like, for example, if you and I had an agreement to sell something and we decided to net out the taxes, to say, okay, We're not going to hold the taxes against either one of our share. We're just going to take those out, and then we're going to split the money. So in this case, it said there's certain distribution fees and expenses that are okay. So it seems that Disney threw the kitchen sink in on the certain expenses clause. They kind of tried to shove the elephant in there.
They threw more stuff in there. Usually, if you have a distribution of a movie by a major company in Hollywood, so if you're Legendary Pictures, for example, and you make Dune with Denis Villeneuve, and you got Dune Part 2 coming out this year.
Very excited for that.
Your production, yeah, me too. Your production, you spent $120 some odd million producing that film. And you contract yourself with, in that case, Warner Brothers to be the distributor. Warner Brothers expects, on average in Hollywood, the distribution fee for something like that is typically around 30% from best we know. Now, that can fluctuate a little bit up or down, but you usually have kind of an industry standard figure. Just like if you were to sell something in a consignment shop, and the consignment store is going to take a 30% takedown for selling your item, right? And the consignment store is responsible for advertising it, for selling it, for doing all that work, and they get that 30% commission for doing that. So it's the same for most Hollywood distributors out there, that if Warner Brothers spent $100 million on marketing the film, they're going to collect a portion of the rentals that come back from the box office, usually 30% of them. So if it made if a movie makes $1 billion and $500 million comes back in rentals, the distributor is going to collect about $150 million of that, 30%, and then the other $350 is, again, very general 30,000-foot view terms, but you get the idea. But Disney was playing with even those numbers, saying that, oh, well, this and that and the other thing, and it's like, wait. But I think the big thing for distribution is what happened in the streaming side of things, because that is post-theatrical distribution. That's just as important, if not arguably more important than theatrical, in terms of revenue power, and they yanked the exclusivity away from HBO Max, and therefore HBO Max was like, well, this is all we got now, because Disney decided to co-release it on Disney Plus, and of course Disney probably didn't pay TSG anything for the distribution on Disney Plus,
which, by the way, was blamed on
key.
Chapek, specifically, saying that Chapek's strategy was to refocus on building the wholly or majority-owned SVOD, specifically Disney Plus and Hulu. So that was put on Chapek, although they do bring it into the Iger era, obviously keying off with that Iger quote.
And it may have been something that he did. I don't know, from that side of things.
I'm just saying that's the framing of the lawsuit. The framing that TSG is taking, the stance they're taking, is that the big shift was when it shifted over in 2019 from Fox to Disney, and Chapek said, we're focusing on Disney Plus. That was that impetus, that was that drive, that was that modus operandi that they were going under to pump Disney Plus at the expense of HBO, at the expense of and thereby TSG, right, because of those revenues.
Right.
But they wanted to get those numbers up and keep them up, because they wanted to, get that hype boost for Disney Plus.
So at the end of the day, I mean, your kind of thoughts on where you see this lawsuit going. What do you think the trajectory is here? How is this going to play out at kind of a cursory level?
So I think at a 40,000-foot level, this is going to ultimately end in a settlement. I think many people have said this, but this is the type of thing you don't want discovery on. You certainly don't want your books opening up to discovery, which is, allowing them to become public, because guess what? The SEC is going to start getting involved at that point. If you're talking about systemic fraud, systemic financial fraud, you definitely don't want that. And these previous cases have settled. Similar cases have settled. So I do expect this to reach a settlement. However, what I will say is this is huge for the industry at large, because if you think about it, people are smelling blood in the water with Disney. And especially at a time in which a lot of new properties aren't being made. They're looking back in the couch cushions for money, for saying, okay, if we sue right now, we can dig up a couple million that we were owed. And look, Disney's on the ropes right now. They've got, they're hurting. They need this. They need to come to a settlement. They can't drag these things out. So they're just going to come to a settlement agreement. So I wouldn't be surprised if others don't take a swing at Disney as well as in Hollywood in general. If other similar lawsuits don't crop up in this era. But certainly this is going to be something that ends up in settlement, not in the courtroom.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think that's the whole point of this. If you're TSG, you know that a company like Disney does not want to go full tilt in the public specter with a lawsuit like this, and you're going to take what you can get. I mean, you're going to fight for a good settlement, because knowing that Disney wants to keep it out of the courts. Again, this has been bizarre. The streaming era has really screwed things up. I mean, in terms of how Hollywood is handling these kind of business issues. I think over the next 5 to 10 years, if I had to predict, they will smooth out radically, because they're bringing the advertisers back into streaming. Every streaming platform is now driving towards an ad-based system. And as I told people, the same as it was before. 40 years ago when cable came on the scene, you paid a premium. You didn't have any commercials.
Right.
Within 5 to 10 years, you were paying the same premium. Actually, you were paying more. And you had commercials.
Right.
So, I mean, the advertisers will always come back in. That's going to solve a lot of the issues downrange for the Writers Guild, the Actors Guild, the directors, the producers that want these residuals from streaming services. Those aren't there now. All these streaming companies, with the exception of maybe Netflix, operate at losses. And now with stuff like this with TSG, same kind of thing. And I think this is one of the big reasons I think the FTC, all the antitrust stuff, they put out guidance. They don't want to see a lot of these big Hollywood studios merging and getting together anymore. They were very, very standoffish with the whole Amazon MGM thing. They were very standoffish with the Disney Fox thing and forced Disney to strip out a big chunk of Fox, selling off all the sports networks.
And this is just tempting. It's just so tempting for this type of self-dealing, which is, i.e., dealing with your own entities, violating of contracts, that you're setting them up for failure. You're setting them up to put themselves in these scenarios, because this is exactly where they're going to look for money, in this type of self-dealing.
Yes, indeed. Andrew, I want to thank you for being here. Make sure you guys check out Legal Mindset on YouTube and on Twitter. Andrew, what you got coming up? Tell the folks.
I've obviously done a review of the summary judgment motion in the CFTOD in Florida case, so go over there and check that out. I've done a full review of this case, the TSG case, breaking it down all in detail, as well as getting into the Snow White controversy. I've got videos coming up on many different topics out there that you guys are interested. So come over and check those out, particularly my Disney videos. I've been really cranking those out over the past week. So make sure to come check that out on my channel, Legal Mindset, and also my locals, legalmindset.locals.com.
Very good. And hopefully you'll be up and around, and maybe you can try to make it in Sunday for the live show. We should have a good one.
Absolutely.
Talking about all these lawsuits, we'll have Ron Coleman there as of right now. He's scheduled to be on the show. So should be a lot of fun, folks. Stay tuned for that one. Good to see everybody. Hit that like and subscribe. Leave a comment before you head out the door today. And until next time, take care.